Are we live? Okay, we're live. Hello, and welcome to the Museum of Glass Theater, and both in person, our audience in person, and also live online. And welcome to our weekly interview series. Today we have the great pleasure of having the wonderful guitarist and drummer and composer and educator, band leader, a friend of mine for many years, the wonderful Milo Petersen. Milo, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for asking me. Yeah.
Of course. We've been working on we were talking about this before we started. We've been working on this for a while, and I've talked to Milo a couple different times, reached out about doing things. He's always been busy, and one of the reasons you're busy on Sundays is because you also perform with the SRJO, the Seattle Repertory Jazz Orchestra, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, and anyways, we'll get into all this stuff later. I always forget to mention this, but now since we're here, I'm going to do this at the beginning. If you have questions for Milo or myself, please feel free to put them in the comments or ask us in real time here if you're here in person. But for Milo, for people that don't know about you and your life in music, can you kind of talk about where you were born and how you got started playing music, where you were raised and all that kind of good stuff?
Sure. Well, I was born in Kent, Washington, actually in the Renton Hospital, where they later erected a Kmart. So I was born at Kmart. Anyway, it was Renton General Hospital, and I grew up in Kent. And my grandfather was quite a musician. I lived next door to him, and he played harmonica and accordion. And before he let me touch his harmonica, he made me whistle a tune. So that was my first lesson. And after that, we sang in church choir, and I played violin starting in 3rd grade. And, only went through 7th grade, but.
So in 3rd grade, was this like a class, like formal education in school, or was this outside of school?
I think the first summer was outside of school, and then I started in school, in the school orchestra. You
mentioned your grandfather was a musician of sorts, or played. Was there, like most, I think, families that have musicians and people are listening to music, were there things that you kind of gravitated towards or that they listened to that was kind of on in the background of your upbringing?
Well, that applies more to my parents. My grandfather was from Denmark, and so he played sort of traditional music, kind of a German type of nature. There, he lived on the border of Germany and southern Denmark, and so think of German songs on harmonica and accordion, and that's kind of the ballpark. But my parents had extensive record collections, particularly my mom. So she was really into Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald and Harry Belafonte and Miriam Makeba and the Mills Brothers. And so we grew up listening to a lot of that, plus all the great singers, Tony Bennett and Andy Williams and Perry Como, Tennessee Ernie Ford, all the big stars of the day.
Yeah, well, which at the time
50s.
Of the day, it was pop music of the day, right? I mean,
yeah.
It was just, that's wonderful. I mean, a lot of times I'll interview people and they'll say, well, they started listening to maybe it started with the Beatles and then later got into jazz, but you were listening to all these great jazz icons from day one, plus, very talented artists like Perry Como. I don't know if you'd listen as a jazz artist, but a wonderful vocalist,
exactly,
great talent.
Yeah, right, yeah. There was a lot of that playing all the time. And then, of course, all of their Christmas albums. And most notably, Nat Cole. My mom was a huge Nat Cole fan, including the trio before he started singing.
That was my next question, is as the singer or the pianist, because most people, Nat Cole, he's a great singer. It's but he was a tremendous influence and talent to so many artists on piano as well.
Yeah, definitely. Some say he changed how piano got played. So, I used to enjoy watching video of him playing the piano and looking at the audience. Yeah. Meanwhile, he's just burning, looking the other way.
Yeah. Well, okay, so 3rd grade, you're doing violin. What happened after that?
Well, I played violin in school orchestra through 7th grade. Okay. And then I became a guitar owner. I thought carrying a guitar around would make me look pretty cool. But I didn't really start learning how to play it till I was about 15. My sister had a boyfriend who played a little bit and still plays, and his son plays all over Tacoma. Every week, my nephew Norman Baker plays at McMiniman's and various venues. Anyway, he was my first guitar teacher. He taught me basic chords, and we sang harmonies and stuff in a duo that we had. So
I think an interesting part of what you're saying, and I know as a teacher you probably advocate for this as most people that teach this style of music do, but the singing, and singing from a very early age to get the sound and the resonance of those notes internally before you get them externally on the instrument. But that's wonderful that you're doing that at such a very young age, starting with your grandfather, making you sing something before you even touch the instrument. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, well, it was a lot easier to whistle a tune than it was to find one on the harmonica, so I gravitated toward whistling and singing. And we were in church choir, and I enjoyed choir singing all the way through college. There's something powerful about 100 voices singing mostly in tune together.
You haven't mentioned the drums yet, and you're a tremendous drummer, and I first knew you as a drummer long before I knew you even played guitar. So when did the drums start entering into the scene here?
Well, I became, as a little kid, I was really interested in drums and I would abuse Lincoln logs and big metal butter tins. You know, we would strap them on our waist, and so I was always really attracted to drumming. And then I was in my grandma's garage one day, and I asked her, "What are those big round things in the canvas bags up above there?" And she said, "Oh, those are your Uncle Frank's drums." And so I contacted my Uncle Frank, and I said, "Do you mind if I look at your drums?" He said, "No, no." I looked at them, and they're really ancient, a big, tall, leady drum with a painting on the front of a naked blonde sitting on the beach, and with a light inside, and eighth notes painted on the side of the floor tom. And I asked him if he minded if I messed with them. He said, "You can have them." So I got those, and I think I was about 23 or something like that. And I started kind of getting serious around age 25.
Okay. So 15, violin, guitar, singing in the church choir, around a lot of music at home. So there's quite a bit of time between 15 and 23. So what happens in the interim there? You started playing. Where'd we go from here?
Well, let's see. After learning a few basic chords and how to play blues, I had a guitar teacher when I was about 20, who had been the jazz guitar player in our high school band under Hal Sherman. Everybody remembers Hal Sherman. I didn't.
Not everybody, but
Well,
talk about Hal just for a minute for those that don't know.
Well, Hal Sherman was a great band director, and he was at Kent Meridian High School. And he started a series of big band concerts at the Opera House. The Kent Meridian, I think they called it the Collegiate Jazz Festival, where he would invite college big bands to come perform, and his high school band would play with them and basically hang with them too, you know. And we used to go to that all the time. I wasn't in the band, but I used to look in awe at the band and wish I could do that. So that was kind of
Well, and
deal
later
with Hal.
Later in life, he was in Bellevue Community College. He was there for a long time, and he amassed built a massive program over many years, and he amassed a large library of big band charts. I never met him. This is just what I know from talking with people. And care to discuss that at all? Meh. We don't have to talk about it. Anyway, so that's Hal Sherman. So so you were working with Hal.
Yeah, and he had a class in high school called beginning band, and the only requirement was you had to play an instrument you'd never touched before. So I picked the trumpet. So I did study trumpet under Hal Sherman for a brief year in high school.
Well, so you had a guitar teacher, and I'm assuming
His name was Jim Kelleher. Okay. And respect to Jim, because he was quite good in high school, and he does. I think he does psychic readings now. I don't think he plays guitar, but anyway.
Well, I'm assuming he probably turned you on to some guitar players. So who were some of your guitar influences in your formative days of playing guitar?
Well, he mostly turned me on to what some guitar players did, like here's what Barney Kessel might have done, and that kind of thing. But for me, at first, I got into Charlie Christian just from hearing about him and buying some records, and then as I went along, I got into Herb Ellis and Joe Pass, of course. All the mainstream guys were just really exciting, and I took lessons from them when I could, whenever they came through town. And, when I first started college, when I was 21, I became aware of Pat Martino, and became frightened to death by Pat Martino, and remained so. So he's a big influence. And then later I got to know Ron Eschete, the 7-string master guitarist who lives in L.A., and I began studying with him, and we remain really close friends, and I go there and take lessons whenever I can.
I had the opportunity to see him play at when it was still the Bud Shank Jazz Festival years ago, and that was the only time I've seen him in person. But he just tremendous talent and so down to earth and humble. And you could ask him anything; it was just like, oh yeah, just totally no big deal. Not a big like I'm this person and you need to worship the ground I walk in. Just very just an average Joe, just tremendous musician.
Well, he played at your brother's place too, with the trio one time, as I recall.
Yeah. But the thing that struck me the most was seeing him at the festival. I mean, that's when I first met him, and I was floored. I mean, who was this guy? I will never forget that. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I'm assuming you started gigging around this time as well?
Well, I was in school up at Western in Bellingham, and there was a guy there at the time named Fred Ralston who was a vibes player, and he'd had some experiences playing with people, and he was running he was my theory teacher, and he had a group which included Mose Lucas and Dave Petersen, and then we had a group too that played quite often in a tavern in town with Dave Petersen on electric bass, and Mark Seals played piano, Mose Lucas played drums, Doug Osgard played saxophone, and a guy named Locke Clark played trumpet. And we logged a lot of hours playing, like a couple nights a week there for a couple of years. And we were all they had all been playing for a while. I was really a rank beginner. I was just lucky they let me play with them. So.
Well, now, when you were at Western also, was Chuck Israels there at the time too?
No, that was much later.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So who else was on the faculty there when you were up there to study?
Well, let's see, a great choir director named Dr. Robert Scandrett was a big influence on me in terms of his abilities. He was the kind of guy who could put his head down and call people by name for being out of tune. He could hear everything. Bill Cole was that way too in the big band. Gene Zorro was an important faculty member there. Edwin LaBounty was a piano professor. Bill Cole, like I said, was the big band director. He was a legendary trumpet teacher from the U and from Western. I studied privately from Dave. He was younger than me, but vastly more experienced. So that's the way I went. Yeah.
I want to go back really quickly. Can you talk a little bit for people that don't know? I mean, many musicians do, but 7-string guitar versus not playing a 7-string guitar, and the advantages of that in a setting, because you've been doing that for quite some time.
Well, the advantage is range. You get more notes in whatever direction you choose. Most people choose to have lower notes, although I think maybe someone can correct me if I get this wrong, but I think Johnny Smith spent some time with a higher 7th string, although I'm not really familiar with how he did that. But usually people are looking to expand the range in the low end. And the great Mundell Lowe, who I had the pleasure of performing with at Tula's, he achieved a wider range by dropping his low 6th string down to a D to great effect. He was amazing. But as far as the 7th string people, as I understand it, according to Ron, George Van Epps, in 1939 converted a big Epiphone into 7th strings, or had it converted, and sort of began a craze that way in the jazz world. And I think most jazz 7-string players use a low A string. However, there are others like Dan Sales, the great guitar player in Seattle. He uses a low B. Most rockers who play 7 use a low B because the relationship's the same as on the top, E to B, and on the bottom, E to B. In Brazil, I'm told that the 7th string is often tuned to a C, and people do runs on it, and then everything else stays normal. There's a big 7-string tradition in Russia, and they use a wacky tuning. I think it's DGB, DGB, D. So it's a big G chord if you just strike it, and there's a lot of literature based on that tuning, and in fact, I bought a classical 7-string from Bulgaria that's built for, that company makes them to feed that Eastern European market. So it's pretty vast over there. But I think it's safe to say that most so-called jazz practitioners use a low A. And the advantage to that, I think, is that, well, it's a whole step lower than a B. And the open A is useful in so many keys, so many prevalent keys, common keys, I should say. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. So, speaking of clubs and your time in Bellingham, clubs, as we all know, they come and go, whether they're around for a couple years or 25 years. Eventually something happens and the clubs change. So what were some of the venues you mentioned? You were playing with Mark Seals and Dave Petersen and Doug Osgard. What venues were we playing at in Bellingham at the time?
Well, there was a main one we played at twice a week. It was called Pete's Tavern. And the owners were Pete and Ray, and they, threw a little bit of cash at us, and very little bit. And we just went there and tried to work out the things we were working on in school, And then there was a place up the street from that called Fast Eddie's. Both these places are gone. And those were the main 2 places I played. There was Bill Martinez had a Mexican restaurant in Fairhaven called Dos Padres. He also had a venue in downtown where they had a bigger stage. So he had a lot to do with providing some music. And that was back then. Now I'm not sure about all the venues up there. But
you mentioned, I think you mentioned Tula's a minute ago. For me, just throwing that out there, I don't know if I told you this, but one of my favorite experiences was watching you play a gig at Tula's, and it was yourself, and it was Paul Gabrielson on bass, and Ollie Jackson was playing drums.
Oh.
And you guys were playing all this amazing. Do you remember this concert? Maybe not. Yeah. Anyways.
At Tula's?
This was at Tula's. It was trio, you guys.
Oh,
So
okay.
you, Paul, and Ollie.
Okay.
And you were doing all this metric modulation stuff, and very impressive. Anyways, whatever. Moving on. So after Bellingham, what happened?
Let's see, after Bellingham, I moved to Seattle and just, started to try to play with people, have jam sessions in my house, and try to get whatever gigs I could get. And Parnell's, a great jazz club at the time, was going in Occidental Square. And so I spent a lot of time there watching bands that come through. And then Jay's dad, Jay Thomas's father, Marvin, one of the greatest supporters of all time of this music and of our local master, bought it. And so they ran Parnell's for a while, and so I got to be involved in playing some of the afternoon jam sessions, and Jay would call me when he would get stuck for a drummer. I would lug my antique Naked Lady bass drum down there and play, or try to play. I got to play with Buddy Catlett, and got to sit in with Eddie Cleanhead Vinson down there, and had some really fun experiences,
So did you kind of know at the time, like, you wanted to make Seattle your home, or this was the closest, largest city with a big jazz scene at the time, or did you have much of a plan, or just kind of the way things worked out?
My plan was to try to survive, and by doing as much music as I could. I did a lot of other things, like a lot of people, having different kinds of jobs. And I grew up. My father taught me a trade when I was a kid. I spent all my free time going to work with him in the construction industry, so I could go out and get work on a journeyman level pretty much any time I wanted. So I did that from time to time, and hope I never do that again. So I want to make sure that's clear.
Fair enough, fair enough. Well, all right. So as far as teaching goes, when did you begin teaching? Because you've been associated with different programs over the course of your career, so how did that start?
Well, I started teaching up in Bellingham just because there would be people around who would see the school big band play or see one of the combos play, and they would come up and say, "Can I get a lesson?" And I go, "Well, okay." I mean, I wasn't even sure what I could have to offer, but so I really started back then. And then moving forward, I didn't really teach that much when I first moved to Seattle, but I did apply for and receive a teaching job at Western from 83 to 87. I taught as the affiliate faculty at Western. I drove up there once a week, and also at Olympic College in Bremerton. And meanwhile, trying to take lessons from people that would come through town, like Tal Farlow and Herb and Cal Collins and Ronnie Eschete. So
I'm wondering, it seems to me, and maybe I'm completely wrong about this because I wasn't around at the time, but it seems to me that artists used to be more approachable about giving lessons than maybe they are now. Would you say that that's a fair assessment?
I'm not sure. I was amazed when people the stature of Joe Pass would say, "Yeah, sure, come on over to my hotel." Yeah, $50, yeah. And Jim Hall was offering lessons for $100. I wasn't fortunate enough to take one from Jim, but one of my students did. So I'm not sure. I haven't hit people up for it recently. The last guy I asked declined. It was the great drummer Julio Barreto. He was here with Gonzalo Rubalcaba, and they were scaring everyone to death with the way they played. And I went up to him after the set and said, "Excuse me, Julio Barreto, right? Is that what I said?" Yeah. I said, "Excuse me, do you teach?" And he said, "No." So that was the last person I asked. But
Fair enough. Well, can you talk, speaking of drummers and teaching, can you talk about your association? Because we've discussed this before, but many people don't know this. Can you talk about your associations with the great drummer, Elvin Jones?
Well, I'm not sure I would call it an association, but I was extremely lucky to be able to know Elvin Jones and to record with Elvin Jones because of my friend Steve Griggs, the great composer and saxophonist, and who's organizing Jim Knapp's memorial, by the way. Jim charged him with that in his will. Yeah. Anyway, Steve wanted to. He had a pipe dream of being able to record with Elvin, and he asked me what I thought might be a way to go about it, because he knew that I'd done some stuff with some other great drummers, Billy Hart and Victor Lewis, and I said, well, there's a guy in town who has made drums for Elvin and knows Elvin, Greg Keplinger, so maybe check with Greg, and Greg can check with Elvin and his manager wife, Keiko, at the time, So he did. Greg checked with him, and they said, well, this gets this. So if that can happen, this can happen, and then it happened.
Yeah. Well, can you talk about the experience of being around Elvin and working with Elvin?
Yeah. So whenever he came to Jazz Alley, or when I lived in New York, I saw him at the Blue Note, and whenever he played anywhere, I always went to try to go hear him because he's so amazing. And how how to put it into words. When we found out, when Steve decided to go ahead with it, then Elvin's band was playing in L.A. for a week. And so I went down to L.A. and just got a hotel and just went to their gig every night and just tried to be around the way he plays every single night. I even went to Tokyo one time to a clinic he did and went out in the country to one of the gigs they did with Delfio and Carlos McKinney and quite a band. But being around him was just a trip. I don't know what to say, man. Just watching him work and watching him interact with people and watching him be complimentary. He was complimentary to people about me. He didn't even know me. It was almost like he was just doing playing a gag or something. He was just a super friendly dude. He treated us like peers, which is, of course, ridiculous. And I remember picking him up at the hotel the second day of the recording session, and he asked me, is everything okay? And I said, yeah, everything's fine. He was humble. He was really attentive and observant at the record date. He watched everybody. I often tell kids about that, how, because some people get into a real introverted space, but Elvin's attention was always really out. He was watching the bass player, and he was watching. Yeah, I got to where I could realize that I could kind of cue a chord change, by making a slight I wasn't like throwing my hair around or rocking out or anything, but I realized that I could kind of go like that at a chord change, and he would sort of hit a crash and support the music that way and accomplish it by, of course, listening and looking. So, and watching his foot tap during playbacks was, some people might. But Elvin was. So it was just really educational and really funny.
Lots of nonverbal lessons just by observing on your part. Did you guys ever get in and talk about any musical stuff, or not really?
Yeah, I remember one day driving out to the thing, he started talking about Thelonious Monk. And he was, I'm going to spare everybody my imitation of Elvin's voice. Although I'm told it's sort of close, but no. I respect him too much. But the upshot of what he said was, people want to be like Thelonious Monk. So they play what Thelonious Monk played. He said, if you want to be like Thelonious Monk, you need to be yourself. That's the best way to be like Monk, is be yourself. So. Although undeniably, the imprints on the music that he made with his particular intervallic choices and whatnot are hard to avoid when you're addressing his canon, right? So.
Well, can you talk? You mentioned Parnell's. I want to go back a minute. You mentioned Parnell's in Seattle. So what time period is this when you moved back to Seattle?
I moved back to Seattle in 1977, and.
Can you talk about the scene at the time? I was born, this is not a dig, I was born in 78, so I'm curious what it was like, who was around, what the clubs were like, what the school system was like.
Well, let me tell you, Sonny. Well, as far as clubs, gosh, there was Parnell's, and there was a place called the Pioneer Bank that was on the northwest corner of First and Yesler, downstairs. And they had a lot of stuff going on down there. John Demetrio worked there. Actually, that was before that, because I came down from Bellingham. I saw Sonny Rollins there on my 21st birthday. It was his one night he played there. I saw Horace Silver there with Bob Berg and Tiger Okoshi. I saw the great guitars there a couple of times, Herb, Barney Kessel, forget who the third one was. Maybe Lorinda Almeida, or I saw Pat Martino there the first time. I mean, to be honest, I couldn't even really hear it all because it takes time, to be able to actually. I remember seeing the Mahavishnu Orchestra, John McLaughlin at the Paramount, and kind of nodding off because it was just sensory overload. I couldn't really hear it, to be honest. So there was some of that going on for sure, but also things I did pick up. I saw Charles Mingus at the Pioneer Bank. It's probably more. I can't think of them right now. But
what about musicians on the scene that were around playing and working all the clubs? Who was around in the periphery at that time?
Well, I think that was kind of in a spot where, in between the old times and now, where there's a fair amount going on, and in the old days, there was a lot going on. Like Gary Steele told me, we used to work 8 days a week, and we had nice cars and nice apartments, and making $50 a night, and then now it's
we're still making $50 a night.
now it's one gig a week at $50. So, I mean, that's not totally true, but basically it's kind of true. So there was a period in there when there wasn't that much going on. Of course, there was private parties and whatnot, but there was a small group of people that seemed to do a large amount of the gigs back in that particular area. Dave Peck, who you mentioned earlier, Chuck Deerdorf, and Chuck Metcalf, Dave Petersen, Dave Coleman. Yeah, definitely Floyd. But we used to joke around, well, who's on the gig? Well, it's Chuck and Dave and Dean and Dan Dean and Dave and Chuck and Dan and Dean. Dean Hodges, and because those guys were doing a lot of the gigs, And then things changed in the early 80s. More people moved in, and things started to expand, and now there's more people doing different kinds of gigs, which is good. So.
Well, you mentioned New York. So when did you make the decision to move to New York, and what spurred that decision?
Well, I first visited New York in '77, and I went to the Village Vanguard, and because the Woody Shaw Septet was playing there, and I had a teacher at Western by the name of Scott Reeves, who's retired now, but has a Grammy-nominated big band that plays around the world, and he's a genius and a great guy, and he's an astronomer. He builds his own telescopes, and a super good guy. And his son Eric Reeves is a really great drummer, and his wife Janet Reeves is a great pianist and singer. Anyway, Scott was talking to us a lot about Woody Shaw, and he was our improv teacher up at Western, and he had examples of his songs and transcriptions of his solos. And so naturally, when I went to New York and saw Woody Shaw was playing, I gravitated to. I was going to the Vanguard anyway, but he had an amazing band, a seminal band. Woody Shaw, Carter Jefferson, Renee McLean, Jackie McLean's son, Onaji Allen Gomes on piano, Clint Houston on bass, and Steve Toure on trombone. They recorded 2 landmark albums, Rosewood and Stepping Stone. And I was really impressed with Victor Lewis's compositions. And he has a tune kind of, I told him he should bill it as the modern Parisian Thoroughfare. It's kind of an homage to 7th Avenue South, where the Sweet Basil and Village Vanguard are in Manhattan. And he liked that idea, by the way. But so that tune, 7th Avenue South, and his tune called Legend of Cheops, Really, really cool. You know those songs. They're so fun to listen to. And when I heard that band, I got an urge to want to live in New York and also to want to be a drummer who composes. Victor really inspired me a lot. And so I started thinking about it then, and 10 years later is when I moved there. So.
And how long did you live in New York?
4 years. Mm-hmm.
And so I'm assuming there were musicians that you worked with out there. Did you have because I know you're a band leader, but you also do a lot of sideman work. Was there your own group that you were working with, or were there groups that you were working with regularly, or?
Well, most of the work I did there really was commercial work to pay my rent. A friend of ours, Ted Brancato, you know Ted? Yeah. Yeah, well, he was a guy up at Western, amazing piano player. He moved to New York earlier and was doing a lot of songwriting work with Gene McDaniels and playing with Dizzy Gillespie's daughter, Jeannie Bryson, a singer, and all kinds of people. And he worked for an office called Steve and Scott Orchestras, and they put out about 40 bands a night. Back then, things got funny with DJs and whatnot since then. I'm not sure what's going on, but at the time he suggested I contact them, and I did, and went and did an audition and got in one of their bands. And so I played a lot of weddings for 4 years, and which was great. I mean, I met some great musicians on those wedding gigs, including the Paul Shapiro, the tenor player in the band I was in, and I remember Mike Mossman showed up, the trumpet player. He showed up one time on a gig, and Billy Cobham's brother, Wayne Cobham, showed up on a gig playing trumpet. Just amazing. So those were fun in that way, and playing music, of course, is fun.
So after being in New York, what was the impetus for you to come back to Seattle? I'm assuming you came back to Seattle after that.
Yeah. Well, back to New York, I did do a lot of jazz playing in my other times. Like we did a lot of recording at my friend Peter Dowdle's house, a bass player, with a drummer named Dave Mead and a great tenor player named Paul Ostermeyer, and a piano player named Ted Kushin. I played a lot of stuff with him. And Ted and I did a quartet gig in the Village. I did a trio gig with Billy Hart and Tyreek Shaw at a place called Indigo Blue, which is in the basement of the famous Edison Hotel, which was quite a musician's hotel, and in fact where Larry Coryell passed, where he was staying when he passed. And then going out and hearing people and stuff and sitting in. So, and then I did move back to Seattle. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What was the mindset? Why did you want to come back to Seattle? What was the thought process?
Well, there were a lot of personal reasons for wanting to come back, and one of which I didn't know about until I got here, and that was that my mother became really sick. So I was really glad I was back, because I was near her. So she had a life-threatening condition, which she survived. So. Yeah.
What time period did you move back to Seattle? When is this now? Where are we in the grand scheme of things here?
1991. Yeah, 30 years ago.
I'm alive at this point and starting to get into jazz. That's like right when I'm getting into jazz. So I'm not quite up to Tula's yet. Tula's was more like 1996 for me when they had the session. It was on Sundays with it was Andre Thomas and Ruel Lubag and Michael Bizio. They used to have that Sunday session there. So that was when I first. But I'm sure I probably saw you. Did you ever play at Drake's with Tracy Knope?
Drake's?
Yeah, here in Tacoma.
No, I don't think I did.
Yeah, I know I started seeing you probably more like mid to late '90s. So that was right after, roughly when you got back. So,
yeah.
So what was the scene like? Was it from when you left to New York and then came back? I mean, I'm sure it had changed quite a bit. Anything, more clubs, more places to teach.
Yeah,
more
it
places
seemed
to
like
play.
there was more stuff going on. Private teaching started to happen more. Referrals from band directors and whatnot. So, yeah, there was more going on for sure.
You've been teaching for quite some time. I'm trying to think some of the students of yours that I've worked with. I was very impressed, or at least in your sphere of influence. It was Ben Feldman and Owen Boxwell.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit? I don't know if you want to dig into that, but very talented young folks.
Yeah, well, I want to study from both of them. So, I don't know what else to say. I mean, they're both amazing. You
Seems
probably
like
know Andy Coe too. And,
Oh, yeah.
and Ari,
Yeah.
Ari Joshua. Yes. Yeah, those are my boys too.
So you're all over the place. No, I was just impressed, and it seems like Tacoma's got a history of a great jazz scene, but I think part of it with Seattle is there's more places to play, and there's more of a density of great musicians and support, and so therefore there's a lot more opportunities for young musicians that are really trying to get things together to play and be around a lot of these great minds and talents. So it's great to see. It's great to see. Have there been any school programs that you've been affiliated with for quite a bit of time, or?
Well, let's see. I've been affiliated indirectly with Roosevelt High School. I've had many of their guitar students, and Garfield High School, and many of them have been given awards at essentially Ellington or the Reno Festival or this festival or that festival. So they've done me proud, and they deserve the credit for it. But I got to admit, it feels good. I'm not gonna
Well,
lie.
it has to. It has to. I mean,
Yeah.
if you look at any of the guitar players, as you mentioned, Ari Joshua or Andy Coe or Owen Boxwell or the programs that you mentioned, which are arguably some of the best in the country for what they do, that speaks very highly.
I mean, all of these people would have done just fine without me. But since I was in there for a second, I'll go, okay.
Take the credit. Take the credit.
Well, not really. They're the ones who sat alone in the practice room, like we all know about, and did the work and branched out into directions beyond and different from what I had to say. Yeah. So they really deserve the credit. But I'm happy that I could be somewhat of an influence. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, I'm curious. I mean, you've been doing this for a long time. You mentioned, the 1970s till now. What are your thoughts on the economics of the music business, say 20, 30 years ago till now? What are your opinions about it?
There's economics? Wow. I don't know. Like I said, most people start out and have some kind of other source of income, and work hard to try to get paid playing and or teaching. And I really don't know how to talk about the economics of it other than, get good at saving money and get good at finding an income stream. I don't know what to say, man. Yeah. I mean,
Fair enough. I was just curious and see if you had any thoughts on that.
I don't know how to even speak to that, really. It's tough to say to a young person, yeah, go out and have a career as a jazz musician. Hey, but then again, look at all the people we know who survive through their tenacity and dedication. So it's, if I can do it, anybody can do it. That's the way I feel about it.
I say the same thing all the time. Yeah. It's been interesting for me. I've been teaching now. I started teaching in 1996, and over the years I've taught countless students, all different ages. But it's been interesting to see folks that are very affluent, doctors or lawyers or whatever, they're learning how to play, and they say, I wish I could do what you do, and I think that's kind of an eye-opening thing. Not everybody, I mean, but there have been those moments, and I'm sure you probably encountered the same kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So in many ways, it might not have the monetary reward, but there's lots of other great rewards to being able to, play this art form with other people around the world and have that talent.
Well, for sure, and plus just basic musical things. I can remember seeing people who could barely play at all, but they played one thing that was like, oh, what was that? What'd you do right there? That. And I go, oh, thank you. That's good. I like that. Keep that. And yeah, you're right. There are a lot of people who have expressed desire to to have wanted to go that route when they were younger or whatnot. But they're doing what they need to do. They need to be that doctor or that lawyer or that philosophy teacher, whatever. So I can honestly say there isn't another job that I wish I had done. I've done a lot of jobs, and my first major in school was counseling and guidance, and I was even dabbled in that field as a volunteer and as a paid intern type before I went to music school, and was very interested in that, and still am in reading about it and whatnot, but decided that I wanted to try to be a musician, and it's really what I wanted to do. So.
We were talking before we got started here about your association with the SRJO, and you said you've been doing that now off and on for about 6 years-ish?
I can't remember when I started doing it exactly. Maybe 6 or 7 years. I could probably look it up, but yeah, it's been really fun. I've gotten to play with some really great people, notably all the people in SRJO, but including the guest artists. Which
I saw the recent one was like Joshua Redmond. That music was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. He was really gracious to us, and we've done 2 with Christian McBride, and he was likewise really, really nice to the little people.
Fair enough. Well, aside from SRJO, I also know you've had a long-standing relationship or a weekly band with Jay Thomas, and isn't there an organist as well?
Yeah, Scott Lytle.
Can you talk about that project a little bit?
Well, before the pandemic, we were meeting once a week, playing trio and sometimes quartet. Steve Griggs would join us, and I would play drums over at Scott's house, and Michael Brockman joined us before. And as you know, Jay Thomas is a voracious transcriber, and we have a book full of things that he lifts off records that most people don't know about and don't listen to, and they're always new to me, and so we play through these transcriptions. We listen to the original recordings and try to get close to what the people played. And then when the pandemic hit, we decided to change it and move to Jay's house, where he had a bunch of windows he could open on all sides of the room, turn the heat up, wear masks, and keep quite a bit of distance. And then I began to play guitar with it, and we would use this app that we all know and love called Drum Genius, and run it through a speaker and do the same thing, just work on charts. And that's been, well, like I said, since the pandemic started, we've been doing it twice a week at Jay's house. So that book is thick, Kareem.
Well, I saw. Didn't you guys do a gig recently? It was Boxley's or something where you guys performed? Was that?
Yeah, we did one at Boxley's. We did a mini one at Kaluna, the new club, with just piano, guitar, and Jay. And we've done some other private ones for Seattle First Baptist Church Jazz Vespers, and also a block party out there. And we played at the Bounty Coffee Shop on their patio one time. So we've done a few things. Not enough, not nearly enough, but.
Well, I'm glad to see. I mean, things are slowly opening back up, and there seems to be more and more opportunities to play. I mean, with the loss of Tula's, if anyone watching this has not yet been to Kaluna in Seattle, I can't recommend it enough. Jason Moore and all the staff there have done a great job of making that a very cool room for playing.
Yeah.
So but it's nice to see things are starting to, as I said, open up. Well, I know a lot of the groups and some of the musicians that you mentioned did a lot of touring back and forth either to Europe or Asia. Did you ever do any of those trips with Jay by chance, or any of the exchange kind of things in the past?
I did 2 trips to Japan with Jay. One in 1985, we went to Nagoya, and we played 7 nights a week for 10 weeks. And then in 1986, we went to Tokyo, And we lived there for 4.5 months. And we played there 6 nights a week in a place called a Hostess Club. And it was really a great experience to actually have the feeling that you live there. You know, we stayed in a really cool hotel that was a Western style hotel, meaning the rooms were big and spacious. And actually the occupying troops used that particular hotel right after the war because it was more suitable to Western lifestyle type of stuff, right? So it's called the Gajoen Conco Hotel, and it was really a great experience. I remember my mother was able to come over, and my son came over, and so was able to share the love of the travel and the culture, you know, with my family. So
I'm curious, being over there, did you notice a different response from audiences listening to the music than you would with audiences here listening in the States?
Well, a little bit, yeah, but I have to add that those gigs weren't jazz gigs per se. I mean, any performance with Jay Thomas on it is a jazz experience, any way you look at it, because, you know, of his mastery. But his wife Becca Duran is a beautiful singer, and I played drums and guitar, and a great pianist who lives in L.A. now named Curtis Brengel played piano in the first trip, and so we played a lot of standards, but we played some pop tunes too, and it was a long. I think we played over, was it a 5 or 6 hour period every night with short sets and then longish breaks, and so it was strange. So. And it was dining atmosphere, so it's hard to gauge what it is you're asking about, which I think what you're asking about is, are people more responsive to jazz music? Yeah. In general, the answer is yes, as evidenced by the number of coffee shops with walls and walls and walls of LPs, and the main jazz rooms, you know, the Pit Inn and a couple of Pit Inns, and various jazz clubs in Nagoya and Tokyo, whose names I could come up with, but they're not popping into my brain at the moment. Jay could fill you in on those. He goes there a lot.
Yeah, Jay, if you're listening, let us know.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're into the last 5 minutes here, and I've kind of lost track of time. Are there any questions from anyone in the audience, for myself or Milo or anyone online? Any questions that we can address about anything we're discussing? Yes?
Yes. Right now,
the question is, are you still teaching? And it's the first part of the question is, do you still teach guitar, or do you also teach drums? And what do you teach? What do you teach?
Yeah, well, yeah, I teach both. Right now, I only have one drum student, but mostly guitar students. Oh, you want to repeat the question? Or?
So the question is, what's the difference between teaching students music versus jazz drums versus jazz guitar? Am I getting that correct? Yeah.
Well, there's specific literature that, you know, is labeled so-called jazz. So a controversial word in and of itself amongst, you know, some of the greatest practitioners on the planet. Somebody once said, if you call Max Roach a jazz musician, you'll have to fight him. For a lot of, you know, social political reasons and associations with that word. However, there is a large group of, or a large body of music that people have basically agreed to call jazz. And but your question is interesting because to teach jazz, you have to teach music, because you can't really play jazz unless you understand music. And so the nuts and bolts of how music works covers all the bases. It covers any style anybody's interested in playing on any instrument ever. So that's my approach. I get sometimes people who aren't particularly drawn toward jazz music, but when they see how, if you take a jazz standard or an American songbook standard and you break down the elements of it, and they go, well, how do you do that? And I said, well, you understand how music works, and this is how music works within my ability to teach that, so in a way it's not really separate, I guess. And then there's obvious markers and definers like rhythmic, which mostly are rhythmic, and also anthropological, where rhythms come from human beings throughout time. I learned a thing from the great drummer Billy Hart, he has a thing where he teaches Africa, India, Brazil, West Indies, Cuba, New Orleans, and then two branches. And one branch is the even eighth note subdivision, and the other branch is the triplet subdivision, more Afrocentric. So I think as those things combine, you get what we call jazz, and with the heavy influence on the Afrocentric side. That's my, I guess, preference, you could say. Yeah. Can I say that?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. All right.
Excellent questions. Any other questions, in person or online, at this time? All right, then what we're going to do here, and again, we're running a little behind, but that's okay. If someone were to ask you, an aspiring musician or a music student, and they were thinking about becoming a musician, here you are now in 2021 with all the experiences you've had educationally and just living life and playing. What are some things that you have found that have been very beneficial and helpful for you to grow as a musician that you would feel that would be necessary to impart to them?
Well, go out and listen a lot. Listen to a lot of people, listen to a lot of records, and practice a lot. And I think that kind of sums it up. Decide if you love it, or decide on what level you want to do it. Maybe you want to do it, as an adjunct to whatever else interests you in life. The things that interest us inform our art. That's true of in any medium, don't you think? Any painter or any poet or any musician, any sculptor. If something lights you up, you're more likely to write a song about it or make a painting of it. So I think maybe what I would say is, let your music be informed by your life, and have an interesting life, and meet interesting people and talk to them and learn from them, and also don't take any lip about what it is you want to do. Yeah, basically, to put it nicely.
Well, Milo, thank you so much for being a guest today, and thank you to our viewers here in person and online. Again, we do this every single week. If you enjoy our content and you want to support us, you can make a donation online via Venmo or PayPal, or you can mail a check, and all that information is on the post. There's also a suggested donation jar here in person. We're going to take a short break. We're going to reconfigure, do a quick sound check, and then we've got a live performance, live stream with a bunch of original music of Milo's and both mine, so that'll be starting soon. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll be right back.
Thank you.